Welcome to our Wednesday night discussion group on May 13th. I think this is our 9th discussion group online, and we are in the book of James. I'm excited to have my friends here, all of you. I was thinking about how to start, and I think instead of having one of us pray tonight, I'm going to actually play the Serenity Prayer. Does everybody know the Serenity Prayer? Or at least part of it, kind of the most popular part of it, I think it really fits into what we're talking about tonight as we read through about the use of our tongue and
pure religion,
obedience and pure religion. And so I will go ahead and share my screen and play this to start off our meeting tonight. God, help me to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a great prayer, and it's our prayer for tonight that as we read through the scriptures, that we will be able to discern what we are to do, what we release to God, and where we put our trust. So I have got my notes open here. Oops, let's close this out. You can probably see all that. And for those of you, I think Daryl is joining for the first time. What we've been doing is Tina, that's right. Tina hasn't joined us online yet. We've been reading through the passage that we're in a couple times in a couple different translations. And then we ask a bunch of questions about it and see if we can work through those questions. So we're only right now looking at 2 verses to finish chapter 1. So let me see if I can see my panel. There we go. Okay. So I just need a couple volunteers to read James 1:26 through 27. in a couple different translations. I've got NIV up on my screen, and then I also have Bible Gateway open, and we can go to, I think it's on New Century right now, but we can use Passion, the Message, the Voice, some various different translations. So who would like to read the NIV version for me? Let me look through if I can see anybody waving at me. Oh, Virginia, is that you waving? Okay, let me unmute you. Okay, you're unmuted, Virginia. Go ahead.
Okay. Is it 20, what was the verse? 26 and...
Yeah, 26 and 27. Can you see my screen? Because I also have it up on the screen.
Yes. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
Very good. Thank you. I think this is the New Century version. It's very similar, but maybe I could just get somebody, since I have it up on my screen, somebody to read that. Thank you for that reading, Virginia. Okay, Stephanie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
People who think they are religious but say things they should not say are just fooling themselves. Their religion is worth nothing. Religion that God accepts as pure and without fault is this: caring for orphans or widows who need help and keeping yourself free from the world's evil influence.
So as we go through these different translations, thank you, Stephanie, be thinking about what your questions are. What is the world's evil influence? What does polluted by the world mean? Let me go to Bible Gateway, and let's see. I think we've had a really interesting, let's do a New Living Translation. Can everybody see that? Who would like to read the New Living Translation? Is that too small? Or can you see that okay? If you're on a computer, it's probably fine, but if you're on your phone, that might be a little small. Let's see, do I have any volunteers? Paging down, paging through. Oh, Tina, is that you waving? Okay, Tina, great. Go ahead and unmute, and if you can, is that big enough for you, Tina?
Yes.
Okay.
If you claim to be religious, but don't control your tongue, you're fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you.
Thank you, Tina. And let's see, let's do two more. Let's do the, is it the Passion?
I've got the Voice and the Passion translation.
Okay, so I've got the Passion up. Did you want to read that, or?
I have the Voice up.
Yeah, the Voice. Okay, Mark's going to read the Voice. So go ahead and I will find that. Okay, here we go.
So this is James 1, verse 26 through 27 in the Voice translation. If you put yourself on a pedestal, thinking you have become a role model in all things religious, but you can't control your mouth, then think again. Your mouth exposes your heart, and your religion is useless. Real, true religion, from God the Father's perspective, is about caring for the orphans and widows who suffer needlessly and resisting the evil influence of the world.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome, man.
Let's do the Message, because that's a paraphrase, and so it usually lumps verses together and kind of words it in a very different, just gives you another angle to look at it. So let me get one more volunteer. Daryl, did I see you unmuting yourself? You want to read this for me?
No, but I can.
That'd be great. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
The Message. Wow. Terry Warren gave me a copy of that. I don't know how many years ago, and that was a good book. Anyone who sets himself up as religious by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air, and it's only hot air. Real religion, of the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach up, to the homeless and loveless in their plight, and guard against corruption from the godless world.
Ooh, I like that. That really adds to the understanding of that. Thank you, Daryl. You've got a nice reading voice too. Okay, so let me go to my notes and let's just start listing some questions we have about what we've just read about 6 times. Okay, so this is where you can unmute your mic if you like, and I'm going to put this in a different color so we can see. What are some questions that you have as you heard this read? Or observations. Could be an observation, an aha moment, or looking at it a little bit differently than you have looked at it before. I'm paging through. You can just go ahead and unmute your mic and say it if you have a question.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay.
Out of all of the translations, when you read the message, when Daryl read the message, okay, it's talking about orphans and widows, but that translation, okay, orphans are homeless, okay, but widows and loveless, that translation, I wonder if it includes a bigger group of people than widows, because it doesn't sound like it. Who are loveless people?
Okay.
Yeah.
But I know that's not the Bible per se. I know it's paraphrased, but I just wondered about that.
Thank you. That's a great question. Who are the orphans and the widows? And does this passage include more than we think, than we have thought? That's just that kind of came to my mind too, Tina. Like, oh, so does this include? Is this supposed to only be? This is the only people we serve, the orphans and the widows, or which kind of? Oh, I'm sorry to talk about it. Nope, not supposed to talk about it yet. Sorry, only taking questions right now. Okay, questions. Who has a question? Let me look through my videos and see if anybody else has a question or an observation.
How does one control their tongue?
Okay, good question. How does one control their tongue? We could talk all night about that, probably.
I have one in the form of
You have a
question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's a comment kind of in the form of a question. What is religion as it's discussed in this passage?
Thank you. Great question. I had that same question. And also, let's see, I'm going to do a page break up here. So, but there we go. Religion. How about something about this last line here? What does it mean to be polluted by the world? I think when I read it in NIV, what does it mean to be polluted by the world? Which was an actual, and that's in the NIV. I think other translations say, this one says, keeping yourself free from the world's evil influence. There was another one that talked about not getting corrupted. Any other questions that you have as you read through this, or?
I have a question. Can
Yes.
you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's a little bit faint, but
okay. I will hold my
that's
mic
better.
like this.
Yeah. Okay.
Just reading from whatever translation is right there above your questions.
Yes.
The part in verse 26?
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry. Yeah. Where it says people who think they're religious but say things they should not say are fooling themselves. So what does it mean by saying things you should not say? How do we know what we should not say?
Yeah, it's interesting that I believe this was New Century. I didn't mark it.
Okay.
This in the NIV, it says those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue. So I guess it is talking about words. Yeah. So words that come out of your mouth. What are the things we should not say? Is that how would you word your question, Megan?
Yeah, just based on the phrasing of that translation. Or in the Passion Translation, it says, but fails to guard his words.
Right, and this one in the NIV, it says tight rein on your tongue. So tight, so I can see James was definitely making a point here. Tight rein on your tongue. That's NIV. Any other questions? Or if not, we'll start addressing these. And then we might make it into chapter 2 tonight. I think this is pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and start talking about it. So who are the orphans and the widows in this passage? Let's just remember where we've been. James is one of the disciples. Most likely, most scholars agree, this is the half brother of Jesus. And so he's seen a lot, and he is now in a place where he's writing a book to the 12 tribes who are the Israelites who are scattered in the diaspora. They're scattered. And so he's writing this letter as an encouragement to them, and also kind of a little bit as a guidance. We've talked about how James really is a lot like Proverbs, and also like the Beatitudes. There's a lot of parallels between, so it's almost a wisdom book. So there's a lot of things in here that he just kind of pushes all together, and he's trying to give them some tips on how to live. And so here we are on verse 26 and 27, looking at maybe there was something going on with them. Maybe they were not taking care of their orphans and widows in that time, in that day, in that age. But do you think that because he only lists orphans and widows, that's the only people that we're supposed to care for in order for it to be pure religion? I'm going to open the floor for any thoughts on this orphans and widows passage. And maybe I should also look at what it says in so in the Message, it said homeless and loveless in their plight, which Tina had brought up. What else did we look at? The Voice. Did we look at the Voice? What did the Voice say? The Voice said orphans and widows. And the Passion translation says orphans and widows. Seems to be pretty. Let me look at the New Living. New Living says orphans and widows. So it looks like the Message is the only one that kind of really changed that, or broadened it, I should say.
Stephanie's raising her hand.
Okay, so Stephanie. Yeah, Stephanie's raising her hand. Go ahead, Stephanie, and unmute yourself.
Okay, my idea was, I think there's a couple of the translations that made it sound more encompassing, like the homeless and all that. So I kind of think that's probably maybe what it means. It means everyone who's ignored or looked over. But I think the reason why they specified fatherless and widows was because, don't forget, in that time, the only ones that mattered were men, and they overlooked them anyway. So I think maybe he was trying to get a point across, I mean, that's just my idea.
That's a great thought, Stephanie.
That's right on the money, Stephanie.
Got him in her back pocket.
Yeah, I think the Message is trying to show a larger group. In other words, your religion isn't just to the orphans and widows. It is to all those who are in need. So maybe the Message, maybe Eugene Peterson opened it up a little bit more. But James could have been using orphans and widows as a representative group of a larger group. But I think it was also being very specific for the reason that Stephanie said, is because the widows without a woman without a husband who had a husband, and probably most likely a minor, in other words, somebody who was younger without a father, who was there to support him. And also, they typically did not have any means of legal defense either. James, in a number of his sayings here in the book, has references to some of the legal side of things. We'll see in chapter 2 where he talks about dragging people into court. And so he for some reason has a heightened issue with legal proceedings, and the orphan and the widow didn't have any kind of legal defenders. If they were taken to court, they would just be run roughshod over and probably everything taken from them. So these two categories were the least supported and had the least amount of legal defense, and just didn't have the ability to take care of themselves. So James is saying this is something that is important to God, the orphans and the widows specifically, but also I think representative of a larger group of people who couldn't support themselves and were marginalized and kicked to the curb. We'll find out in chapter 2 again, and there even should be a chapter break there at the end of 1 and the beginning of 2. Remember, those chapter breaks were put in later and aren't a part of the original letter. James didn't write chapter 1 verse 1, chapter 1 verse 2. Those were put in later, which are very helpful for us. But James is talking about this broader group of people. He talks a lot about the poor as well, orphans, widows, and the poor. So it's a large group.
With that thought in mind,
so right on the money, Stephanie.
Good job, Steph.
I said exactly what you did.
Just with a lot more words.
Just with a lot more words.
As we think about this context, I love looking at it. Why was this written and who was it written to? But then always stepping back and going, does it have a message for us? And as we look at this, who are the people that are the least supported and the least defended in our culture? Anybody? Sometimes we call them the voiceless, or sometimes we say we have to be the voice for those who have no voice.
Yeah, I think today's, certainly somebody who is widowed is not in a great position. But in this age of empowerment, maybe not as much empowerment as I would like, but women are more empowered to go out on their own, to get a job, to fend for themselves, to support themselves. Again, maybe not as much as we would like, but definitely more so than back in ancient Near East when James was writing. But I think Eugene Peterson in the Message hits on a point. Some of the least defended nowadays are not only the widows and the orphans, those in foster care, right? Those in group homes, children, but the homeless.
Homeless.
So I would say the homeless.
Homeless
are not defended very often, and certainly when it comes to legal representation as well, they're not really always given a fair shake.
We also call them the unsheltered. There's a lot of different words for homeless, those without homes.
Any other people groups?
Yeah, what other people groups are least supported and least defended in our culture?
Least defended.
The preborn children.
Oh, preborn children. Okay.
50 million, 60 million have been aborted since Roe v. Wade passed.
Wow.
60 million people of this country. We're worried now about COVID killing people, and they're trying to get legislation in to support Planned Parenthood. And every act they've passed, Nancy Pelosi tries to get money in for Planned Parenthood for abortion. And that's my soapbox.
Well, I know you work with the people at the pregnancy care clinic, so of course that is definitely the people that you care about, because those babies don't have a voice. They have no voice. Who else does not have a voice in our culture? Yeah, Daryl?
One that I can think of are elderly people who don't have relatives, especially those that don't have relatives. Even some that do have relatives, obviously, but I mean those that I met a woman one time who I helped her carry a bag of groceries. She was 101, And she started crying. She said, I have no idea why the good Lord let me live this long. I don't know anybody. I have no friends. I have no relations. I have nobody.
Mm.
That was astounding for me to hear that. Nobody. She knew nobody. She's 101 years old.
Nobody. Makes me think of
Carrying her own groceries.
our dear sister Justina, who we met along the way at the lagoon and then at Citronica. You know, we've kind of become her family. I know Stephanie and Jamie miss going to see her at the nursing home. She doesn't have any family. She has no family, no blood family to care for her and help make her decisions, her end of life decisions. And it's hard to imagine. I have so many people around me that I consider family, and so many real family. And yeah, that would be, especially the elderly, they can get bamboozled, you know, they can get people pull all kinds of things and trick them and take their money. And so, yeah, they definitely would be one of the least supported and defended in our culture. Very good. Thank you, Daryl. Any other groups of people that you can think of that, yeah, Megan?
People who are undocumented or do not
Okay.
have legal documentation and have to jump through a bunch of hoops.
Yeah, you know, it just takes knowing somebody who has fled another country that is, everybody's being murdered, or their kids are being forced to be in gangs, and they leave their country to try to find a better life. And they come here, and granted, you know, there's a whole thing about, you know, we're not going to get into the politics of it, but I think it is fair to say that undocumented people can come into this country. We build whole entire industries around getting cheap labor, and a lot of them get forced into like work camp kind of situations where they get kind of blackmailed. Like, if you don't work for free or in terrible conditions, we'll call the border patrol and we'll have you deported. And so they kind of blackmail them, and it's a sort of slavery in a way. So definitely they get caught in some situations where they can't stand up for themselves, and they really don't have a situation they can go back home to. So once again, not to get into the politics of it, but definitely they are a people group in our country that are not defended. Any other groups that you can think of?
Black people and those who are incarcerated.
Okay. I'm going to say people of color and incarcerated. Yeah, right now, you know, here we are in the middle of a whole another thing with some white people shooting a black person, and two situations that have come up this week. And it's just crazy to think about. You know, my husband's a runner, and he can run down a street and not worry. In Lemon Grove or even East County and not worry about getting shot. But
I can run in Clan-T.
You can run in Clan-T. That's terrible. Shouldn't have said that on the recording.
Oh.
But yeah, we've had a couple situations here in our East County where people have gone into grocery stores with a KKK hood on, and also a mask that has a swastika on it. You know, obviously to make a statement. So Santee has kind of gotten a nickname, which probably isn't good because we know a lot of good people that live in Santee too. But yeah, to walk in somebody else's shoes, a homeless person, an elderly person, an undocumented person, a person of color, somebody who has they've been incarcerated and they've lost rights, what that feels like and how to speak up for them. Yes.
What about in the whole world, the people that are persecuted for their faith? I have a calendar from Voice of the Martyrs, and every day they're talking about another country and something to pray about. And we don't even know what persecution is compared to what some of these people go through. Just unbelievable.
No, we don't. Yeah, the torture, and yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, we'd be shocked. We get all bent out of shape when somebody just looked at us wrong, or violates our rights, whatever. Yeah, that's a good addition. Anyone else? I'm looking to see if anybody's waving at me. Virginia, you have your hand up. I'll unmute you. There you go.
Yes, I was thinking about the veterans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, some of them come home with no legs, no arms, and I don't know how they're cared for, but I don't know if people overlook them, but I know that's a real bad situation.
Thank you, Virginia. And that makes me think of the mentally ill, because a lot of our homeless are on the streets without family, without health care, and they're just not well mentally, and they need help. They need medical care, they need family, they need community. And some of those are vets who've experienced atrocities in war, and they've killed people and can't even sleep at night, can't close their eyes because they can't live with themselves. So yeah, definitely. So I think, when we read this passage here in James, we kind of jumped to the second verse, talking about who are the orphans and widows. But when you see what James is saying here, you say, those who consider themselves religious and yet don't keep a tight rein on their tongues, deceive themselves. The religion is worthless. Religion that the Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. I think as we've kind of unpacked who the orphans and widows are, you can see that I personally can't care for all those people in a very thorough way, right? I mean, I think God has to call me to care. I care about them, but I can't be, active or be an activist for every single one of those categories. But if God puts on your heart to care, like my mom, she volunteers at a pregnancy care clinic, and she is busy one life at a time helping young girls make decisions for life. And others have a heart for homeless, or, Megan, now that she's married to Jesus and his family situation, she might have more of a heart for those who are undocumented. So I think it's important for us to not just narrow it in and go, well, orphans, I don't know any orphans or widows, so I guess I'm good.
Yes,
just go on my way, And I think that the point here is to sit with what the intention of what James is saying is that God accepts pure religion as this: to care for those who are defenseless, who cannot care for themselves. And, I've never led a ministry in a prison, and I'm so grateful that Gwen Hampton does it still. I don't know if she's doing it right now, but she's for years and years has gone in and sat with women and men in the prisons and led them in Bible study. That is caring for, that's pure religion right there. Okay, so let's go on to our next question, which was, how does one control their tongue? Oh boy, so let's lump that in with this one. What are the things we should say, shouldn't say, the keeping a tight control on your tongue? So I'm gonna move that up here. How does one control their tongue? Any thoughts on that? If we look back at the passage, this one says, people who think they're religious but say things they should not say are just fooling themselves. That's an interesting way to look at it. And New Living says, if you claim to be religious but you can't control your tongue, you're fooling yourself. And I love when Daryl read the Message. Says, anyone who sets himself up as religious by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air and only hot air. So I think, we're going to see in the book of James, he sure does pay a lot of attention to the tongue. So how does one control their tongue? I will open the floor and let you all have a little discussion about that. How do you control your tongue? Anybody?
Just say what you need to say on social media.
Nice, Sarah.
Well, isn't it interesting, real quick?
And then Margaret will go.
That is a new way of controlling your tongue. because we could read this literally and say, oh, as long as I don't say it, as long as I don't speak it, if I control this thing right here, I can type whatever I want. No, we take the gospel and the Bible and overlay it onto our culture as well. And this is one way that we can control our tongue. I think some of the translations says not just our tongue, but our speech. And so often now with social media, our speech is what we type. Let us not be fooled that just because it's in black and white written down, that it's not something that we say, because what is even Jesus, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks, but out of the abundance of the heart the fingers type on Twitter and Facebook and social media and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a good one, Sierra. Way to go, girl.
Yeah, it's so much easier to be flippant and say things you would never say to somebody's face on social media. You can be mean and snarky, and you don't have to face the person that you're saying the mean things to. So online bullying, cyberbullying is a real issue. So I'll just say this includes, so how do you control it? How do you control your tongue?
When I asked the question, oh, sorry, I forgot Marguerite was going to go.
Yeah, Marguerite had her hand up. Sorry, I can't see everybody's picture at the same time. Marguerite, go ahead and go.
Well, I just think a really big one is to think before you speak. Listen to what the person is saying to you and think about how it's going to affect them. That and gossip, of course. You know, sometimes we say things that we don't even, just in passing, and we don't even think about how it's going to affect the person. So just thinking before you speak.
Yeah, didn't James have a little hint of this even earlier in the first chapter?
Yeah,
what does he say? Maybe we can all say
last
it together.
Week.
Be
quick to listen.
Quick to listen, slow to speak.
Yep.
Yeah, slow to anger. Yeah.
Yeah, we covered that last week in verse 19. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry.
And so if your first instinct is to listen first, that automatically tempers your tongue, doesn't it? If instead of saying, well, what do I have to say? What am I going to say? It's what is the other person saying? And that gives you time to think, doesn't it, Marguerite?
Yeah.
Stephanie?
I think one thing too is it's the delivery. You can say nice things, but if the tone of your voice or whatever is not because it's out of love or out of whatever, I mean, you might as well not even be saying it, So I think that counts for a lot too.
And where does delivery come out of? Your heart.
It comes out of our heart, naturally. Like
out of your heart, out of the abundance of your heart.
Your mouth just doesn't open up and come out with that stuff. It's got to be in here first before it comes out of there.
Which, the example for those who weren't here the last couple of weeks, I gave an example of me working in my backyard and overhearing my neighbors yelling at their kids and starting to kind of judge them and have an opinion of them that was lower than myself. And in this study and in our personal study, we've been going through the book of James, Mark and I was convicted that was not right. And so I started praying for them. And out of praying for them, my heart was softened for them, right? Because prayer changes us. And then we were able to do a chalk drawing for them. And then they came over and brought us some bird feeders. And my heart is a little bit softer toward them. So out of the abundance of, now, I didn't speak to them, but about the way that they were parenting, but I guarantee you if we'd had a conversation, it could have came out wrong. The wrong words would probably come out because my heart wasn't right. So I think, that's a good point, Stephanie. Our tone and delivery, you can say thanks or thanks, and it just, how you say it is very different, but it's out of your heart. Sierra, I wanted to come back to you. You sounded like you had something else that you wanted to say about that social media piece.
Well, kind of. I just wanted to clarify. When I asked the question, I was curious about why James went from talking about what you say and controlling your tongue. And then the next sentence doesn't really give a solution to the problem he just posed. It was not off topic or anything, but he goes from talking about what you're saying to what you're doing. And so I was curious if James was writing with a group of people in mind that typically maybe talked about caring for people, or talked about like how much they knew about the scriptures, or how much they knew about God or Jesus even, but did nothing with their faith. And so I was curious about what he meant by control their tongue, and then goes into about caring for people and why he didn't seem to give a clear solution to the controlling your tongue thing.
I think one passage that speaks to this is when Jesus is at the temple, and you have the religious leaders praying, and then you have a sinner who does not even look up, but just beats his chest and says, forgive me, I'm a sinner. Jesus often called out people who pray to get noticed. They make a show of their fasting, and when they give alms or give to the needy, they make a show of it. There's this image of the way that people gave temple taxes. It's in this metal cone, and when you go in and out of the temple, you could put your donations, if you will, your temple taxes, your contributions in there, and you can make a lot of racket when you put your coins in. And he's saying, some people trumpet. It was the shape of a trumpet. Some people trumpet their giving, they trumpet their prayer, and they trumpet their fasting. That's religion. But when they say things, it's terrible. I mean, in that same example, the religious leader said, I do this, I tithe of mint, anise, and cumin, or whatever it is. In other words, I tithe to the nitty gritty of my herbs, and yet I am glad I'm not like this sinner. In other words, him saying that is putting himself in a prideful, proud way above that person. So he was praying and fasting and giving, and yet he was putting somebody else down with his words. That connects very much. That religion piece, and then using our mouth. We can do drop-offs at Goodwill. We can give somebody $1 on the street. We can do outward things, but if we're not with the power of the tongue, lifting people up and encouraging them, or doing all these outward things and then saying stuff behind their back, then we need to put a control on our tongue in that way. Just a few thoughts.
Did that help, Sierra? It's a great question. And as you look at let's go back to the way this is, it's talking about religious people fooling themselves if they just are basically bragging or prideful in their religious works, that it's worth nothing. And that then he goes on to say what true religion is, true and pure. And we've talked about that, caring for the voiceless. And there's that piece right here, this what is religion as discussed in this passage. You have a comment on that?
Yeah, I looked up the word, and I'm not
word religion?
Yeah, the word religion.
Okay. In what would you look it up in?
The Blue Letter Bible. If you ever have a question about what a word means, actually, like I mentioned last week, it's not even so much the definition of the word, it's the usage of the word. And here in 26 and 27, when it talks about those who are religious and then pure and undefiled religion, it's the root word is the same. And one of the things that stuck out to me was religion is stuff that people do. And again, especially in ancient Near East, at the time this is written, or even before that, in the Old Testament, what other nations did for their religious practices were stuff out of their fear of their God. In other words, things they would do to appease their God or to get their God on their side or happy with them. all those different things that people do out of fear for their God. And I think James is transitioning believers to say, not just because you're afraid of God or to get him to do what you want, but what do you do? What is your religious practice because of your love for God and his love for you? And and he points out controlling your tongue and taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves, namely the orphans and the widows. So that's kind of what religion is referring to here, at least in a small part. It's probably a bigger picture than that, but that's kind of what I gleaned from going to the Blue Letter Bible.
You said you looked up the word in the Blue Letter Bible, and the root word was?
It's the same as, well, it says in 26, if anyone considers himself religious, that is a certain grammatical take on the Greek. And then religion, it's the same word. The religious and religion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same word, just different tense. T-E-N-S-E. Different tense.
The Amplified Bible says, if anyone thinks himself to be religious, piously observant of the external duties of his faith.
Yeah, that's a good way to
Ooh,
put it.
I like that.
Yeah, the things that people do.
Piously observe. Say that again, Mom.
Piously observant of the external duties of his faith.
Again, isn't that what the religious leaders were concerned about? People seeing them pray, this external prayer, out in the marketplace, out in the temple, the giving of alms, making a racket about it, blowing their own horn, trumpet, whatever.
And then verse 27, it says, religion as it is expressed in outward act.
Mm-hmm.
So, what people see you doing.
So it's almost what sometimes we call a hypocrite, right? It's somebody, or like when Jesus was chastising the Pharisees, he was after them. He said, "You're whitewashed sepulchers, but inside is
full of dead man's bones."
Dead man's bones. The ugliness, which I mean, we all have it, right? But I think the thing here is acting like you don't. It's one thing to be in touch with your humanity and go, man, I need help. I need Jesus. Like I'm a sinner, and I sometimes have a bad attitude. But it's another thing to go, oh, I'm perfect, and look at all those people. And, I mean, that's the whole thing about the external acts, the outward acts without the inward. I mean, the acts are important. We're going to see that in James. He says, faith without works is dead, right? So we know that the acts are important, but I guess what James is trying to say here is out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So you're over here saying all these wonderfully religious sounding things and doing all these religious external things, but where's the action? Are you actually caring for the defenseless? Are you taking care of, in our case, the homeless, the mentally ill, the people that need help? So I think he's getting to a heart. I mean, I never even thought of this, but this passage really is about your heart.
Marguerite, and then...
Okay, Marguerite.
Daryl's getting, and then Daryl.
Marguerite, and then Daryl. And then Megan. Okay, Marguerite.
Okay, I think James is very much about action. And I think what he's saying is, and I think there's a fairly common theme there, is that it's not what you say. It's not how you posture and show yourself off. It's how you act towards others that are vulnerable, that you can help. It's all about action and your heart. Your actions show where your heart is. I think is what he's saying.
Or it should. Your actions should show. You know what I mean? Because I think they were
Your actions can show it can show where your heart is, whether you are doing even charitable gifts. You can do that for the wrong reasons.
True.
You can do that for just to be shown as being generous. But when you really go out of your way to take care of people who really are not important, who are not gonna, you're not gonna get anything back,
Right.
And you do it out of your heart, it's a whole different thing. That's what God is saying is a valid religion.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, James
Daryl.
2, 1 through 14 is all about that. It's amazing how what we'll cover next week just flows from it. Yeah.
Daryl, what
Yeah.
gonna comment?
Yeah.
And then
So
Megan and
I'll try to.
Sarah.
I'll try to do this in like one Toastmasters minute if I can. But Mark is exactly where I was when I asked that question. What does it mean to speak about religion? What is he talking about? And there's a difference between performing an act that attempts to produce something good inside yourself or to prove to other people that there's something good in you. There's a difference between that and something good inside you that produces that act. And that, to me, is how this ties back with the entire question about the tongue. Because over in James 3, which we're not at yet, obviously, I know, but no scripture is self-contained. James likens words to water, and he talks about two kinds of water, seawater or salt water, and sweet water or fresh water. And he contends that these two cannot possibly spring from the same well, but yet they both come out of the same mouth. And he asks, how in the world can that be? And the answer, obviously, is that there are two things or two different wells inside us that are producing these two different kinds of words and two different kinds of actions. And those two wells are God's spirit, which is the new man, and the spirit of carnality, which is the old man that Paul talks about all the time. So it's a matter of, rather than me trying to control my tongue, which James contends flatly that you can't do it, he says no man can. Well, God can. So it's a matter of submitting to God and allowing God to control what comes out of our mouth, because it's a fruit of what's written on our heart. That was about 1 minute, a bit over.
That was good. That was excellent. Okay, Megan had something, and then Sierra.
Hi. I wasn't raising my hand. I think you saw me emphatically clicking my pen.
Oh.
But I do have something to say that I noticed that it was related to the orphans and the widows, but as I've been thinking about it, I think it ties in here too. I was thinking, isn't there some scripture that talks about like when you are harvesting your field and you drop something, like leave it there for the orphan and the widow and the sojourner to come and pick it up. And so I just decided to do a search and came across this list of just dozens of verses in Deuteronomy and Exodus and Psalms and other prophets that talk about the orphan and the widow. And so this is something that I'm sure the people reading this, if they are Jewish, that they would know this concept. And I think that just as I'm looking over these verses, it just kind of seems like it's a more of a lifestyle to just have these other people in mind and to include it in how you go about your day and how you conduct your business. And I think that that ties into how James is talking about action, and that it's not just what we think, it's not just what we even say, but it's about what we do.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. That was beautiful. Yeah, I'm sure word study you'd find a lot. Leaving the corners of the fields for, what would be the end of, it wasn't just the Israelites, it was
for foreigners.
For foreigners. Yeah. Okay, so Sierra has her little icon, her hand raised. So cute. So
I just discovered that and I was like, that's so nice.
Isn't that cute? You can raise your hand. That's great.
Zoom thought of everything. So some of y'all know, and if you don't know, I am a huge admirer of Mr. Fred Rogers. He is my homeboy and my hero. Anyway, I've been doing a little studying on him, and he was known on his set with like the people who work on the set to have his own language when he speaks to children. It was called Freddish. It was kind of like a term that they gave him, kind of making fun of Fred, but it was like legit, like a whole thought process that Fred went through when he was thinking about the scripts, and even when he had guests on his show, He wanted to make sure that every line and everything spoken was could be understood by children, and that all children could relate to what he was saying. So he would, so for example, he had a nurse on an episode, and she was demonstrating how she would inflate a thing with a thing, and she said, just trying to describe it, she's like, I'm gonna blow this up. And then later Fred asked his crew to like go over her lines and kind of like dub in whatever it's called and say, I'm gonna puff up this balloon, so that children don't get scared and think something's gonna blow up and like cover themselves, whatever. So it was very particular, and he would kind of have this process of how he would take something that that is like the main message and break it down into like these. The person who kind of described Fredish, it's in a book. He described it in like 9 steps. All of that to kind of set up in my studying of that, and like how it could be, how I could use that in my classroom and the way I relate to my children. I was thinking about like at the center of all of that is really relationships, that Fred Rogers saw himself as someone who had a relationship with his viewers, children and their parents and adults and anyone in between. And my relationship with the children in my classroom influences the way I speak to them. Like if I know that this child doesn't live in a house, I'm going to make sure that the language I use isn't house-centered, which is typical language. Or if I know there are children in my classroom who don't have 2 parents, my language isn't going to be so nuclear family centered, et cetera, et cetera. When I talk about Fred Rogers, I go on for a long time, and then I realize that's not really the point of what I was trying to say. The point is that back to the question about how do you control your tongue, I think relationship has to be at the base of it, like knowing the person you're talking to as much as you can, like wholly and intimately, and again, taking what Marguerite said, thinking before you speak, but thinking about what? Thinking about who you're talking to, and what will resonate with them, or what will benefit this person I'm speaking to, and that, and to relate that back to the social media piece, I think that's the disconnect on social media. You kind of just want to get your thoughts out there with no care or intention. You just want to be heard. And I wish the people I respect the most on social media are the people who take their time in thinking about who might be reading this, the same way Fred did with his television show. Like there's no possible way he could know every single child that was watching his show, but he still tried. He still tried to imagine, like, what kinds of walks of life are bringing people to my show? Like, what kinds of walks of life are bringing people into relationship with me? And I'm going to take the time to use that in the way I speak, in a loving and kind way.
I love that, Sarah. Beautiful, because what you just said actually is the reason that God tells us to pray for our enemy. It's why I started praying for my neighbor, and why my heart is softer toward them and my words might be different toward them, because now I have a relationship with them. And it's so easy to have inflammatory language towards the other, right? And you fill in the blank who your other is. We all have the other. And it could be those people who do that thing, or you turn on the news and you get really upset. It's so easy. But if you had a relationship with them, a true relationship, maybe you wouldn't speak that way. And the problem with social media is that we have lots of words without relationship. And so we can be very mean. and very not sympathetic, unsympathetic. Did I miss any hands? Because we are at 8 o'clock, and I want to, can I indulge you and ask for 5 more minutes to finish the polluted? It's not.
We gotta finish.
We have to finish this. We have to finish.
We can't just do another
chapter
1.5 verses.
Okay. So yes.
And this is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
I have things keep coming to mind of how we can misuse our tongues, and I've thought of a whole bunch of them here, like being overly critical,
Okay.
criticism, judgment, cursing, telling lies, bearing false witness against your neighbor, and just saying hurtful things. Are we being kind?
Kindness is underrated. Yes, Mom.
If we look at Philippians 4:8, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing: fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable, right, pure, lovely, and admirable. So if we keep those things in our mind, maybe, and in our heart, then the ugly stuff won't come out or be there.
Yeah, I agree. It's a transformation process. It flows out of our hearts in this. Well, let's spend a few minutes on this interesting line about being polluted by the world. So we kind of got the picture. Like, pure religion is caring for those who can't care for themselves, using kind words. What does this mean? And maybe we can't cover it in a couple minutes. What does it mean? Pure religion is this: to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. What did James mean? First of all, keeping yourself free from the world's evil influence. What is James talking about? He's not talking about, social media or, pornography online or certain types of music. What is James talking about? Let's talk about that, and then we can apply it to our life and our culture. But what does James mean when he says this here? Any thoughts? I'm open to. We're missing our resident scholar, Lee Logue. Mark, did you do any reading on this just to know what James was referring to when he was talking about? Oh, I think one of the translations talked about not being corrupted by the evil in the world. And what was the evil that was around all the Israelites or the Jews that were scattered around the region?
There were cultures that were worshiping idols and doing all the practices that went along with idol worship.
Yeah, a lot of that, and a lot of this practices included sexual immorality and eating meat offered to idols, and there was a lot of different things that went along with, just not to mention just idolatry, worshiping something other than God. Any other thoughts on that? What James could have been?
Ann, do you mind if I just real quickly go? I just want to clear something up. I'm reading what you wrote up there regarding James 3 refers to salt water and fresh water. I thought what I said, and I hope what I said was, they definitely do come out of the same mouth, but they don't spring from the same well.
Thank
so
you.
I was making reference to the source of those two different kinds of words and actions.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Sometimes I have trouble keeping up with everything. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Keeping your what he's saying to care for the widows, care for those who don't have the protective covering of the male influence in the home. That's what he was saying to the Jews. And keep yourself from being corrupted by the world. What was the corruption that they were facing? So we have idolatry, definitely pagan worship, paganism.
That's Stephanie or Jamie.
Oh, I didn't see a hand. Sorry. I have to keep scrolling through. Yes, Jamie, Stephanie.
Galatians 5, 20.
No, yeah.
The works of the flesh.
Yep. Good time.
Got them all listed.
Not all of them.
Okay,
A lot.
it's not
Most
several,
of-
Marty Pan. The ones from that time. We're
Yeah.
talking about in their culture.
Well,
Correct.
there's still more of them.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Not an exhaustive list, but a very good,
Right.
a very
All right, Smarty Pants. He's got to keep us on task. Right, he's got to keep me on my toes. Yep.
I
I'm
have
going to
a
share
comment.
just one thought. I
Okay.
do think this is a two-parter, right? James says pure and faultless, or pure and undefiled, I think is the King James. Pure and undefiled, pure and faultless religion is to look after orphans and widows in their distress, comma, or that's part one. Part two, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. I do think at its core it's a two-parter, but I wonder though if maybe it's a one-parter, that as you care for the orphans and the widows in their distress, you are keeping yourself from being polluted from the world. In other words, with that heart and with those actions, that mentality, that motivation, that's going to keep you from being polluted by the world, because the world was polluted by selfishness, it's polluted by oppressive regimes, by empire, by and we'll find in James 2, if you're rich, you get all the good stuff and all of the good breaks and all the favoritism. And we'll see at the beginning of chapter 2, I think one of the ways we stay polluted from the world is if you take the big number 2 out of there and just read it as a sentence or as a complete thought. Keep oneself from being polluted by the world. My brothers, as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, don't show favoritism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more together than just the period, chapter 2, done with a thought. I think James continues on because he spends a lot of time on favoritism and what that looks like, marginalizing the poor and showing favoritism to the rich. And we see a lot of that, and I'm going to say it, especially in our governmental administration, that it's the lobbyists and the special interest groups and those who can further your political career are the ones who get shown favoritism, and the other people aren't. And that's, to me, that's a pollution of the world, that big, in a big way. So that as I read it from more of a 10,000 foot elevation, I think it is a two-parter, but maybe it's more of one complete thought, that we remain unstained from the world by our caring for the orphans and the widows, and then also one of the pollutions of the world is favoritism. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to end it, unless somebody has something else they wanted to add.
Can I
Yes.
add on to that from my BSF lesson? It says, in both helping others and resisting sin, believers cooperate with the Spirit and obey God's word to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
Yeah.
So that ties the two together.
Yeah.
Helping others, right?
Right. I'm so glad that we came to this place, because as I was reading it, it's so easy to go, oh, the world, and then you think of it, I don't know. It's
Well,
like
you think of it as us and them.
Us and them, right?
And that's not healthy, and that's not good.
And the worldly attitudes that we can get corrupted with can happen inside of Christianity. I mean, where you use power over others, where you use fear to control others, where you
shame
others. You also, you hoard more and get more, and you don't care for those who have less. And we're guilty of that as a nation. I mean, it's so easy to have, and really going back to what Jamie and Stephanie were saying, those works of the flesh, the selfish ambition, the enviness, the envy, and so to care for others, whenever you go out and serve, and you've probably all experienced this, where you go out and do something that's self-sacrificial, and it hurts you a little bit, and it costs you a little bit, it does something for your soul, and it keeps you from getting polluted with attitudes of laziness and of kind of that spiritually fat, like, where we're not caring for those and that need it. And I think about this time that we're in. It's so easy to just go, well, I'm just going to take care of me and my own. But what would it look like? What would pure and undefiled religion look like today in COVID-19?
And can I make a quick observation here on this? Just a real quick one. To me, the book of James is full of plays on words. Here he's talking to Jews, and they're in a constant habit of purifying themselves from something or other, and especially from other people of the world, right? So he talks about keeping themselves pure. He doesn't talk about constantly going through a ritual to try to purify themselves. So, and he shows them that there's a whole different kind of purity than they've been thinking about for a long, long time, right? And that comes from some other place than trying to purify yourself by doing something. So there's fake wisdom, there's fake faith, there's fake religion, there's fake purity. And he uses these plays on words all through the entire book of James. So that, among other things, is what he's doing here. There's a peculiar poetry at work here that I think it was your mother or somebody a while ago mentioned, or your daughter, I think, that these Jews knew what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. They got it.
Great point. Oh, great point. They had purifying rituals. All they had to do is just go in and do this little wash their hands, splash a little water, and then go out and act like a jerk, right? And we do the same thing. I mean, come on. In our culture, we go to church, we sing our little songs, and then we go out and curse the person in the parking lot because they cut us off. It's the same thing. It's that's a great word, purity of heart. Thank you. I saw one other hand, I think Virginia, and then we'll go ahead and, if you need to go, we totally understand, but I want to give Virginia a chance to say, I'll unmute you. There you go.
Okay, I just saw something, I guess it's Bible Hub, and it used the word stain, but I'm sure it's polluted. It says, simply put, a stain is anything that affects or directs you toward one or more ungodly behaviors. A Christian who is stained by the world carries something of the world, something of the fleshly nature that affects how the Christian behave.
That's good, Virginia. I really challenge you as we close tonight to think about what it looks like, what pure and undefiled religion looks like today in coronavirus quarantine, going to the grocery store, wearing a mask, interacting with people. What does it look like? I mean, I've been challenged personally by this passage and thinking about getting out of my comfort zone and making sure that I am walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So I pray that you all are challenged by tonight's study as well. We'll be back, 2 verses, woohoo! We'll be back to start in chapter 2, which is really, it starts out about showing favoritism and wearing gold and fine clothes and shabby clothes. And so come back next week and we'll dig in for another hour and make a little progress on what James is saying for us today, even though he was speaking thousands of years ago. There's a message for us as well. So let me see if there's any other hands up. Anybody just dying to get a last word in? Okay. Would anybody here like to close us out in prayer and just pray that we can have a heart like God's heart, that God's heart will be in us, that his motivation will shine through us, and that our words and everything will flow out of that heart that's been transformed by the Spirit. I'll just keep paging through until somebody waves at me. All you prayers out there. All you prayers out there. Anybody? Are you going to make Mark do it? Aren't you tired of listening to Mark pray? Nope. I guess they're not tired.
Ready?
It's all yours.
Yeah. Loving God, Father, Son, and Spirit, you are so good to us, so gracious. You give us life, breath, but you also give us the word of life. And we thank you so much that you sent your son Jesus. And We also have the testimony of those that came before us in the Bible. We thank you for that. We thank you for inspiring them so that we might be inspired to dig deeper into your heart and into your way, how we are to be here in this world, here now, today. We thank you for the hope and the promise and the encouragement that it brings, and may we be the same for others. Hope, encouragement, and promises of goodness in this time. Give us health, give us strength, give us patient endurance. The word that we read so much about sometimes in the Bible is perseverance. May we persevere through this, and keep our eyes and ears and our hearts open to what you're saying to us, Spirit, as we go through this, that we might serve you and serve each other. I pray for a blessing on all of us as we go for this week. I can't wait until we see each other again on Saturday. May your goodness and your grace reign forever. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. I should have stopped sharing before that. Well, I will go ahead and stop recording, and then you can all stay on for a little fellowship if you'd like.